Hi, I'm James. In this series I'm going to teach you how to use JavaScript using Google Sheets as a base and Google Apps Script, which is very similar to JavaScript. You can use modern JavaScript in Google Sheets in the Google Apps Script editor, and it works just fine. It's actually the way I learned how to do JavaScript. It's a very fun way to learn JavaScript because it's very visual, it's immediate feedback, it's pretty good debugging, and importantly, it helps you to understand some core programming concepts that are really difficult to understand. What is a function? How does it return something? What is a variable? But these are things, if you use Google Sheets or Excel often, you probably already know. So I'm just going to talk about how to translate your existing Google Sheets or Excel knowledge to Google Apps Script and JavaScript and see what cool things you can make. The way this course is designed is it's once a week, 1 hour a week with my colleagues. The plan or my goal is to do a half an hour theory session and then half an hour practical on the same exercises that I'll be going through in the theory. So you can feel free to follow along with that during this session. Pause my video and have a go at the exercise yourself. Otherwise you can do it at the end, however you learn best, feel free, but you'll find a link to the exercise, both the non-started exercises and the completed exercises in the link in the description below. This is my first video series, so I'm really keen for any feedback you might have. Let me know how you go, hit me up with questions you might have. If you get stuck, please let me know in the comments and I'll try to give feedback. Thanks. So if you go to Tools and then Script Editor, you can see this Google Sheets Script Editor. So in Google Sheets or in Google Apps Script, you can write scripts that will change your spreadsheets. You can also tell it to access your emails, your calendar, Google Slides, Google Word doc, all of the, even your YouTube channel. You can write Google Apps Script to change all of those things or to get information from each of those things. But in this case, we're just working on one single app script that just talks to this, so it's linked to this spreadsheet. So I've written an example function here to help you write functions later. So we'll keep that there. So there's two types of scripts you can run in Google Apps Script. There's the script editor and there's macros. I'm not going to talk about macros today, other than like you can record doing something and then the script will play it back. So I'm not going to talk any more about that, but I am going to use it to present, just so you know. And then in your Google Apps Script, you can see the macros code here, and you can see the code that we're going to write here. Okay, so we'll get started. Part one. So the first thing I wanted to talk about is, when it comes up, is variables in JavaScript are the same as cells in Google Sheets. So the same way this cell has a name, its name is C6, and it has a value, it's the same as a variable. So a JavaScript variable is a named piece of information that has a value. Same as this tax section is just it's a variable called D6, and it's got information in it. So we can treat it the same as a JavaScript variable. So in terms of so how we would work this out, this little puzzle, so we've got a pre-tax cost and we've got the tax rate. So in Google Sheets, you can work this out with a formula. So you could say C6 times D6 plus C6 again, and you'd get the cost with tax. So this is a formula in Google Sheets. It's called a formula, and in JavaScript we have the same thing, but we call it a function. So we will now write our first function. So what we want it to do is the same as this. We want it to work out the cost with tax. So this formula is just, it's called F6 in Google Sheets because it's just the name of its cell. But in Google Apps Script we need to give it a name. So we'll declare that it's a function. We'll give it a name of get cost with tax. And here we're doing camel casing because this is JavaScript, so you can't put spaces in amongst the words. So the name has to be one word, and we use capitals at the start of each word to indicate that it's a it's all one word, it's one name. So then we open parentheses, and here we put in what goes into the function. So the same as the formula here has these inputs, our function also will need inputs. So we want these inputs to be a pre-tax cost and a tax. So we can call them that, pre-tax cost, and let's fix that, and tax. So again, always start with a smaller case, and then any words in there you need to give them an uppercase. So we open and close curly brackets. We just close them now so that we don't forget to close them later. And this function needs a return value. The return is what the function gives us back. So the inputs are what the function receives, and return is what the function gives back. And what we want the function to give back is the pre-tax cost times the tax plus pre-tax cost. You'll see it's the same pattern as here. It's the same thing, it's just where this is just written in JavaScript or Google Apps Script, and this is written as a formula in Google Sheets. Okay, so now we have our function. We're going to save it and make sure that we don't get any errors. And then we can call this function as a formula. So we can say get cost with tax, open and close parentheses, and then within the parentheses we need to put our variables separated by a comma. So our variables here are these cells, so C6 and D6. So C6, comma D6. And now when this function is run, C6 will be renamed to pre-tax cost, and D6 will be renamed to tax, and then it'll return pre-tax times tax plus pre-tax. And we get loading, and we get the right answer. So now we want to continue this example, I want to show you the same function, but instead of having two inputs, it's just going to have one. So we'll write it out again. Function get cost with tax. We're just going to call it, I'll call it 2 because this is the second one. Again, it has an input variable, but this time we're going to only have one input variable, which will be the pre-tax cost. And then we run our code here. As normal, we'll have a return value, and the return value is actually going to be the same thing as above, so we'll just copy paste it. But in this case, in this function doesn't know what tax is, and you can see in the code that tax is black instead of this light blue because we don't know what it is. It's undefined. Because this function is in and of itself. It's not shared with any other function. It's completely encapsulated within itself. So if you try to run this now, let's save. well, actually, that I expected an error there, but if we try to run this function without saying what tax is, so get cost with tax, and we'll give it the pre-tax cost. It's going to give us an error because tax is not defined. So it's a really useful error because we can see exactly what's the problem. So we're going to define tax as a variable this time, as a JavaScript variable instead of a cell. So there's a few ways we can do this, but we're going to say let. So let means this is a variable. We're going to give it a name, which is tax, a single equals sign, and then whatever we put here is what tax now means. So tax means 0.19, same as 19%. And now we can access tax anywhere in this function, and tax, the word tax, will be replaced with 0.19 as the same as the pre-tax cost. The input will now be whatever this input is. So if we set our tax here, we then can save it, and we'll see our spreadsheet update in real time. Now this function only needs the one parameter because tax is set within the function. And then as a further example to this, we can write this function with no variables at all. So we'll just copy paste because it's going to be mostly the same. But this time we'll have no input parameters. So this function will run with no input at all. Again, now you can see that pre-tax cost is black instead of blue to indicate that it's not been defined. So tax is already defined because we copied and pasted it. So we can define the pre-tax cost in this function as pre-tax cost equals and then a number. Great. I just want to point out one thing here before we move on. Because it's a number, we can just put the number straight away, and JavaScript, Google Apps Script will recognize that this is a number. It doesn't need anything else to understand that it's a number. But in this example above, you can see that we've got double quotation marks. It's because this is a word, it's a string, and if it didn't have double quotation marks, JavaScript, Google Apps Script would think that it's a variable when it's not a variable, it's just a text example. Okay, so now we've got a function with no input parameters, and then within the function we define what tax is and what pre-tax cost is. So now whenever we run this function, it's always going to give us the same answer. So again, to call it equals, and then the name of the function. Result is not a number. Interesting. Let's try to work out why this is. Oh, we hadn't saved it. Cool. Okay.
Also, the function has the
same name.
Same name, yeah.
Cool, thanks.
Maybe that.
Yep, that's a really good point. So the function has the same name, so it has to be the exact same name. Save it. Cool. So JavaScript is a programming language. Sorry, Google Apps Script is a programming language, and you need to be very specific. It can't guess what you mean. So if you say tax with a capital T, it doesn't know what this tax with a lowercase t means. They're two different things, and Google Script will not pick up that they're the same thing. Yeah, cool. Alright, so first activity is done. And if I didn't say before, I'm going to give you the option to do these yourself at the end of this this first part. Okay, so we'll go through to part 3, and then you'll do these your own. So open part 3. So the variable value is replaced by what is returned from the called function. So what that means is, so in this case above, you have a formula, and here you have a function, but in the cell is the new value, which is €11.90. So this function, get cost with tax, with 2 input parameters. If you want to know like what is G6, G6 isn't this function. G6 is now, €11.90. So to demonstrate this a little bit further, we'll use Google Sheets. We'll say we'll use this starting number, and we're going to double it. So just times 2. So now this cell, the value of E14 is 20, and 20 is the result or the return value of this function, or in this case it's a formula, but it's a difficult concept to get your head around. It took me some time to realize that if you write a function, it's like that piece of writing is actually replaced with whatever is returned. So if we continue this line, so now if we say E14 times 2, it's going to work out double that, double 20. It's pretty straightforward in Google Sheets, but it's very confusing in JavaScript or scripting languages if you're not used to it. So this is why we're going through it. So now I want to write a function that can be reused, that can be used multiple times, that does the same thing. Because as you can see, this formula, C14 times 2, and then next one, E14 times 2, and F14 times 2, they're all very similar. They all have one variable, and then they times it by 2. So instead of writing it out 3 times, obviously in Google Sheets you can drag it across, and it's going to have the same functionality, but the way we do that in JavaScript or Google Apps Script is we create a new function. We're going to call it double, because that's what it does. You can call it whatever you want, but it's important to give things proper labels, so then it's easier to read it later. Like for example, if you can call pre-tax cost just P and tax T, and this function will still work, but it's not very readable. So you can, I haven't finished this function. So if you, so this function, get cost with tax, it still works, it's just not very readable. So we always try to give it a name that you can understand what it actually does. Okay, so what this does is it takes a number and it returns the number times 2. Pretty straightforward. It just takes a number and times that number by 2. So now if we save it, so we've got an error, unexpected identifier in line 27. So I've written returns. This has to be specifically return. It doesn't understand returns. It doesn't understand give back. It doesn't understand anything but return. It's a special name in JavaScript that means this is what you give back. So return number 2, we'll save it again. Looks like it's fine. So now we can test it. So we want to have this starting value. So we'll say double, open and close parentheses, and then in our parentheses we want to say we want to give it the variable of C14. Right, and then we want to use the same function to double h14, and then the same function to double I14. So the important point is this is the same function that we're using 3 times, and it's giving back, it's returning a value. So if we are interpreting this as JavaScript would, Google Apps Script would, you're going to find the function called double, which is here. You're going to take the input, which is C14, which is 10. Hopefully you see that the value is 10. So now we have double, and then the input is 10. Return 10 times 2, and the value, resulting value is 20. And the same thing again, same thing again. Okay, so part 3. Joining strings. So I haven't renamed these. Okay, so all of these functions took a number and then changed that number somehow. So now we're going to do a function that takes a string and then changes that string somehow. So the way we would join these 2 strings with a name and a description in Google Sheets, there's a bunch of ways we can do it. One way, probably the main way, is concatenate. So we can use a built-in Google Sheets formula, which is the same as a function, but a formula in Google Sheets it works a little bit different to Google Apps Script. If you so some important differences here is in Google Apps Script you can they always have to be all caps. There's no camel casing. If you want to use a string like we have here in the example, you have to put double quotation marks around it like this. But we can use a cell. Also, helpfully, Google Sheets tells you how to use this. But this isn't a Google Sheet lesson; it's a JavaScript lesson. So gloss over this. So one import, second import, close the formula. James is cool. So now if we're going to recreate this same functionality in a function, we're going to make a new function. I'm going to call it join string. It takes 2 parameters, so we need to work out what they should be called. So we've named them here name and description, so that's good enough, that works. Name, description, and then in our function we're going to say return, because these are a string, we can say plus, and a string will add, so they will join these 2 strings together. There'll be one string, one after another. So because it's a string and it's not a number, it's not going to combine them like a number, it's going to join them as one long string. So if we save this, we can see, sorry, we need to say join string, first import, second import, and we get the desired outcome. And again, we're going to write this function 2 more times to have the same as here, one import and then no import. So join string 2, we're going to get rid of the name. We're going to set the name to be always James. So then if we join string 2, all we need is the description. We don't need the name. We'll get the same, and we'll write it another time. We'll just give a gap here. Spaces in JavaScript are not important. They're important for readability, but they're not important for how the language is understood by the computer. But to make it clean and clear, we're just going to put an enter before we return, just so that it makes it a little bit more readable. So this time we're going to change the name this time, not forget that. We'll remove the all inputs, and the description is always going to be is cool. Oops, not camel casing, normal casing for normal strings. So now if we save this, we'll call this function again, join string 3, and we'll get James is cool. So you can see that it literally joins the strings together. So here we have James, we have no space, and then we have no space and is cool. Whereas in the cell, the same way we have a space, we need to put this space in to JavaScript, and then we'll see the space existing in our code. Cool. So that's everything I wanted to go through. So what we'll do now is I'll share this link with you. I'll remove the answers, and I'll remove the formulas. I'll leave the example function there for you, and then you can now do this yourself